Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. We're still waiting for a few folks to sign on, but we plan to begin right at the top of the hour. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a discussion on addressing top threats in professional sports. We think we have a very interesting hour planned for you, so we are really delighted that you have joined us today. Just to get started, I will introduce our panel. Joining us, we have first Glenn Ware, who is a partner and leader of corporate and strategic intelligence for PwC. We also have Chris Sanchez, who is PwC's Director of Sports Intelligence and Enterprise Physical Security. And we're particularly happy today to have with us Darren Sanders, the Director of Security and Risk Management for the Baltimore Ravens. So thank you all for joining us today, and we're really happy to have you as a panel.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Leslie.
So just to set a little context of what we're going to be talking about today, we know that sports franchises face many of the same issues that large corporations face, being vulnerable to a host of threats, both external and internal. Maybe top among them, teams make a huge investment into athletic talent, and they need to make those investments wisely and then to protect those investments once made. We know that professional athletes are among the most widely recognized individuals in the world, subject to virtually 24/7 media coverage. And that level of attention, of course, creates a number of issues around reputation and brand protection. Athletes themselves face risks from fans, stalkers, just to name a few. And teams also face physical security threats, data protection issues, including from cyber attacks, and other corruption-related scandals. So for the next hour, we're going to touch on these and other issues. And so with that, we'll just go ahead and get started. And I think to get started, I'll just throw open to all of you, and I'll start with Chris. From your perspective, what are the top threats facing the sports sector today?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. I appreciate it. Before I get started, I just want to thank Darren personally for being a part of this. I think with his background and expertise, it's just a real treat to have him on this webinar with us. So thank you, Darren. Some of the threats today that I think that are really big facing the sports world, if you will, and especially in light of what's taken place around the world with different events and the bombings, the shootings that have taken place, one of the big aspects that we're looking at, and the way I look at things, especially from a threats perspective, is what's taking place, what's the hotbed at the time. You may have a period where cybersecurity is a big issue. You may have a period where social media is a big issue. Right now, physical threats to physical assets are a big, big topic within the sports world and with all critical infrastructure, really. In light of what's happening in Paris, San Bernardino, it really is a hot topic, and it really is in the forefront of the security directors' minds, both in the sports world and critical infrastructure. Another one, social media threats, focusing on players. Some of the big things that you're looking at are threats to the players, but you're also looking at threats to the facilities themselves. It's part of the intelligence aspect of what these directors need to look at and what they are looking at to help facilitate a stronger security mindset for their franchises. Cybersecurity is one of them. Third-party negative influences, believe it or not. Some of the teams, some of the people that are out there in the cyber world become a physical threat to the franchises and to the assets belonging to these franchises. And also just basic threats to the stadiums. Your common bomb threats, your call-in threats. What are these guys, what are the directors of security doing and looking out for their stadiums as well when these, the bomb threats come in?
And what about you, Glenn? What are you seeing from your perspective at PwC?
So in many things, what Chris said, but if you break it down to the fundamentals, you have threats to the individuals, you have threats to the facilities, and then, of course, the data, the information, and some of the most valuable secrets or the valuable assets of the company are locked up in computer systems. So in the sports environment, we've already seen this, player information, player rosters, team strategies, teams' playbooks. Moreover, I think we all saw in Paris how sporting events can create these venues that bring a lot of people together and those venues can be exploited by would-be hostile actors. And I think, so from a perspective, I'd really welcome to hear from Darren, because I can't imagine that there's a bigger job in regards to sports today than trying to ensure the safety of the players, the franchise, and of course the fans. So, Darren, what?
Those are all valid points. I know the organizations within the NFL, especially the league office, they go out of their way to educate the individual teams on what's going on in the world regarding threats. The name of the NFL is such a big name that anyone who wants to be disruptive to a sporting event, why wouldn't they want to pick the NFL? So the NFL, the league itself, goes out of their way to make sure that we are educated on what's going on in the world. A lot of times giving us best practices, especially at the stadiums where you have 60, 70,000 people who are looking for a positive fan experience, not to mention they've got their families with them as well. So the league takes a lot of precautions to make sure that those venues are protected from a federal standpoint, local law enforcement standpoint, the team security director standpoint. The organizations as a whole have to be proactive in everything that we do to try to give the fans the best experience they can without feeling or having the threats overwhelm them. Of course, we all are thinking about what could happen. I know a lot of fans probably like to go to the game and not have to worry about that, and that's where we come in.
I think ultimately it's about brand protection, and that's really the catalyst to the topics we're talking about in the discussion is the brand protection, the franchise, the shield of the NFL, but also the brand and the name of the teams that are ultimately doing and dealing with these crises.
Well,
go ahead, Leslie. Well, and I was just thinking about and I know one of the things on the slide is the threat or the risk to the team as a result of potential misconduct or illicit activity by a player or a would-be player or a potential player. I think we should talk about that a little bit too, because I think we were all sitting here before we started and just looking at our devices, and we're seeing just a litany of specific incidents that play out, and it's always, the name of the player and then the name of the team.
Right.
So, and the team is then associated with whatever incident, and somehow doesn't say it, but implicitly, it's almost as though they're saying the team's at fault because of one of these. And season's over for most teams. Guy could be home at wherever. And it goes nothing to do with the team.
It goes with former players as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, always associated with the team that you played with.
Right.
That must give you fits, Darren.
It doesn't. I mean, you kind of just have to deal with it as it comes. I mean, those type of situations are going to happen, no matter how many preventive measures are put in place. You just have to be able to deal with it when it happens. Again, the league does a good job of trying to prepare us for what we need to do. A lot of us have law enforcement background, so we tap into our law enforcement experience and our contacts to try to deal with these situations as they come. Being proactive with the players and telling them, advising them of what they should look out for, what not to get into. We have a phrase here, it's called WIN. The initial WIN is what's important now. And we use that during the season. But postseason, we tell them what's important now, and during the season is the same as in the off season. So take care of yourselves. If you take care of yourselves physically, social media-wise, friends or family, you're going to take care of your organization and subsequently take care of the league itself.
So that's one of your big countermeasures, the cultural, as far as that awareness and training, is to bring your when concept into the player's psyche from the very moment they step into the organization. Oh, that's good.
Correct.
And I hear you all, you've mentioned physical threats, which we'll get to a little bit later in the slides. You've talked about cyber threats, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So I want to just sort of delve a little more deeply into some of the things that you've just mentioned, which is sort of understanding your players, understanding your third parties that you use, and a little bit in how you use social media.
All right, so let me just take a swing at this and then ask our colleagues to discuss it. So as we were just talking, the third parties present a great risk to businesses, whether it be the sports industry, banking, big box product, beverage companies, pharma companies, it doesn't matter, is that when you have counterparty relationships or you have employees, insiders, companies don't act and they don't, conduct operations unless there's people involved. So now we have the ability to deploy continuous monitoring type applications and procedures to ensure that our businesses, our franchise, our football team, what have you, can look out on the horizon to see if there's potential threats, and also monitor to see if there is about to be a potential threat. So, for example, we're talking about talent assessments and third-party due diligence. I think we continually harp on this, is that when you unpack many of today's scandals, when you look at it, a great many of them are as a result of third-party conduct. And then when you back it up, you find out, only if we knew this, we would have been able to put in a countermeasure. So what you see like that, a failure of due diligence, not adequate due diligence. So in the context of professional sports, for example, when you're looking at talent, when you're looking at these high-profile, not athletes, and you're about to draft them into the organization, what we have found that when you're thinking about that player, don't just think about the player, but think about the network of people around that player. Because when you bring that player into your organization, you're in a way bringing in their friends, their colleagues, their family members, and I see Darren shaking his head, and I was wondering, Darren, if you could comment on that, because I think you probably have the best view from that.
Well, you do. I mean, the player is just one small aspect of what we are concerned about. We are concerned about his family, his friends, his associates, what they are into. Excuse me. Unfortunately, a lot of times, just the way the cultures are, we have to be mindful of a person's background, who they are, who they associate with, what they're used to doing. It's hard to help them to understand that their life as they know it or had known it is now has to change, because just having your name alone is not the major concern. It's the brand name, it's the NFL, it's the team name. So if Joe Blow has a buddy that's into something, that person's name, if something happens with that person, nobody cares about that person's name being in the media. They're going to tie him to his associate, the player.
Did the players appreciate when they're out using social media applications that the team has the ability to monitor that? We all are as fans, but they're looking to see to make sure the players act in accordance with social media policy of the club, and do they understand that what they say could create reputational risk and harm to the club?
I don't think they know it initially. I don't think they think about it initially. I think after
they get called in.
After they get called in, or after we have hopefully something that we do proactively, preventatively, will get into their heads and make them understand that everything that they type, once they hit that send button, it's gone. You can't pull it back. Someone sees it, someone hears it. If it's a video, I just saw a player after this AFC game that did a whole bunch of tweeting about something he didn't like, and it was so negative, and they associate their player with the team, unfortunately. So the team takes a hit for that.
And then also social media, not only in looking at talent, but social media can be used by the teams to look for threats at events. So you can use social media risk analytics to say, hey, you know what? There's going to be some hooligans out in the parking lot. They're already organizing. They're communicating through social media. You take use of those tools. I take it
as much as we can. We try to use everything we can to make the environment not only a better place but a safer place, to make our players and coaches and staff better players, coaches, and staff. So we use everything we can to try to stay ahead of the game. Number one, because being in front of the problem is a whole lot easier than dealing with the problem. Once the problem's out, the problem's out. But we do see on social media how open people are, not only just the players, but sometimes staff or coaches, and we kind of try to tell them, hey, you might want to tone this down a little bit, because it's not just you, even though it's your social media account, but it has a direct association to the team itself.
Well, this is a great discussion, and in some ways it's a perfect segue into this next slide, which is really delving very deeply into social media. And so we've heard some of the ways in which player use of social media can be a problem. So I thought maybe I'd ask Chris, how important is social media as a risk mitigation tool? And what are you looking for other than sort of the information that Darren's just highlighted that gets out there? Are you looking for other things? And then how do you use that information once you've gathered it to mitigate risk?
Yeah, great question. Before I start on that, I kind of want to back up. I just came back from a college showcase down in Texas, and we were working with a lot of teams, a lot of agents down there, the scouts, players, the individual players. And we had a bunch of players come up and ask us, hey, what do you do? What can we look at some of the samples that you're doing and kind of walk us through what you guys do from a risk assessment and social media standpoint? And one of the things I conveyed to them, I actually conveyed two things. One, of course, the negative aspects of it, what we can find out, what we can pull up, but also wanted to convey to them, don't be afraid of it. You have a short time to market yourself as an athlete. Use social media, but use it wisely. So those were the two things, and I think they really, really appreciated the concept of we're not here to scare you, but we want to show you both sides of it. One of the big things I joked around with them is just keep your fingers off the keyboards. Let somebody else do your social media, or at least really take ownership of what you're putting out there. Going back to your question, though, Leslie, one of the things that we look at when we use from the social media standpoint, of course, we look at the threats to the player, threats to the physical assets as well. But we also want to look at predictive behaviors. Mm-hmm. So we use social media a lot, looking at that aspect. If we're looking at an individual, and I'll take it from an athlete standpoint, I'll take it from a threatening standpoint. If we're looking from the athlete standpoint, we want to look at predictive behaviors of his characteristic or his behavior. Doesn't mean he's a bad person, but if you go back and you look at, what he's putting out, possibly what his family's putting out on social media, and you can show some sort of trend analysis of what's taken place, whether it's a narcissistic behavior, whether it's a threatening behavior, whether it's some sort of, just being overall arrogant, and you can trace that back via social media. That's a good telltale sign that we need to pass on to the teams. The other aspect to that is the physical aspects of looking at social media. Are we pulling up threats? How are we pulling up threats? Mm-hmm. Who are making these threats? And then also, are they making any overt actions based on those threats on social media? Everyone's a superhero on social media. You can throw out threats all day long. What you want to look at is, have they done it 2 times, 3 times? Is there a pattern of threats on social media? And then we also want to look at, hey, are there any overt actions? What I mean by that is, I'm going to come hurt this particular wide receiver, and he said it 3 times, and now he's saying in social media, I just bought a ticket to the game, I'm going to the game. So now it's a red flag to these directors of security. How are we going to act upon that? We have this information. We need to look out for this person. How do we pull up his profile and act accordingly?
And are you getting this stuff sort of in real time? How quickly can you pull this information and then act on it?
Let me give you an example. Yeah. After the Boston Marathon, which was horrific, one of the things that we did is that night, like, where's the next marathon? I mean, we don't know if this is a marathon-related thing, but what is the big next sports-related? And it was going to be in Salt Lake City within a week. So you call up Salt Lake City folks and say, what are you doing with regards to social media? And it's like we have one guy with fat thumbs pushing at a keyboard, just trying to look through because it's not something you can just do and deploy with a security professional looking at. You need a very sophisticated suite of data aggregation tools. So what we did, and we volunteered to do this, obviously, is went to Salt Lake City and helped the local, state, and federal officials augment their social media monitoring capability because, as we all know now, a lot of planning, a lot of activity, a lot of tasking is being done by these decentralized networks in social media tags. So that was a really interesting real-time use of social media data aggregation at a big sporting event. And it was a very successful, and the event went off, and thankfully it had nothing, it wasn't. But the use of sophisticated data aggregation can be a key differentiator in predicting security threat. I mean, it's just a tool, right? It's not the end-all, the be-all, but it is something that sports teams, sporting event organizers can add to their suite of security.
Right, and ultimately it's all the tools in the tool belt that you make your decisions on what type of action you need to take on certain situations.
Well, let's switch gears for a minute, and I think I'll turn this one over to Darren. In the beginning of the hour, we talked a little bit about just regular everyday threats to the athletes themselves. And we've got on this slide here something about fixated threats, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But I thought I'd just ask you, what are some of just the typical risks or threats that you face just on a day-to-day basis doing your job, and how do you respond to those?
One of our first primary concerns is the facility itself. We're here more at the facility than we are at the stadium. The players and staff are here daily, so we're concerned about intruders coming in here. We kind of have policies set in place to try to help us to not have unwanted or people who don't have scheduled meetings to just show up and expect to be able to come in. We get a lot of people that want to just come in and have a tour, because, again, the NFL is such a something for people to be fixated on because of the brand, because of the positivity, and because of the enormous effect it has on our society that people want to be a part of it. So you do get the average fan who may just want to show up, or you may get the person who wants to be a threat who wants to show up. So we try to keep our doors closed unless people have an appointment to come here. We are concerned about phone calls. If someone calls, especially after a loss, you may get people who are upset and, again, so into the game itself and to how the game affects their life. We have had threats over the phone, and we try to deal with them as professionally as we can. A lot of times we can deal with it in-house. Sometimes we contact local law enforcement and have them address the issue. As far as people one of the things we don't want to have is that real serious incident of someone just showing up. So we have to be diligent, in what we do as far as observations of people just showing up, or monitoring our camera system, communication amongst ourselves as far as what we hear or what someone else may hear. Communication is a big key to a lot of the security measures, no matter what they are. The more you know, the more prepared you can be. And that's where we try to start everything, with the communication aspect of it.
So this fixated threat actor presents a really strange problem. And I think, somebody who becomes obsessed with a player or a team, and they start to do things, bombarding you with emails, showing up unexpectedly at the player's home, showing up again and I think going around the leagues, I think we hear every single team or league has confronted this. Mm-hmm. And I know we were talking before we got on that you had to confront it as well. And there is a kind of a challenge here. Like, and then sometimes you make the judgment to confront him and say, if you do this again, we're going to arrest you, and sometimes that works. But there's also the concern that if you do that, it's going to be the triggering episode that's going to take him over the line. And so, maybe to you guys, what are the tools that you can deploy to try to make the judgment about, do you confront, and you successfully did that as we were talking before we got on, or do you go to the police? Do you go legal? Or is this somebody who has a mental problem and you use, social services to help intervene? I mean, Chris.
Well, that kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the social media and the predictive behaviors. The one thing, in my past experience in law enforcement, the one thing that your first indications before you actually act, because when you find out exactly what is going to happen, then everything's set with a standard that you have to meet. But what we used to do, or what we did do, and it's kind of what we do now with what we do with the risk assessments, is that predictive behavior. If they're saying something on social media, if they're sending an email, okay, that's one. If they're a trend following, and then there's an overt action, then you have, and it depends on the threshold of the team. What's your threshold from a security standpoint?
And I know we have an example on the slide here of a risk assessment tool that you can use for a fixated threat, right, for example.
And each individual team may have a different threshold based on that threat.
Right.
It may be 2 emails, it may be 3 emails and an overt action. It's up to the franchise, and of course it's up to any type of company. But it's that threshold that you have to set your parameters of what type of security, diligence that you're going to put in place to handle a situation.
I think it's good if you can send a message. You want to be diplomatic as much as possible, understanding that we're not in law enforcement anymore. So you kind of want to be diplomatic in trying to deal with the issue itself. But you also want to be stern enough so that the issue hopefully doesn't escalate or continue just being a nuisance. Because it can become a nuisance just having someone calling and voicing displeasure or what they don't like and then what they want to do, or at some point you just have to up the ante some and have the law enforcement officials get involved to kind of hopefully tone it down.
So what it sounds like you're talking about is there's a lot of planning that goes into that, right? And
yes.
You have a big staff and you have certain pre-planned responses to be able to deal with it. You can't make this stuff up as you're sitting there in your security office saying, hey, this is let's figure out what to do, right? So you're continually exercising your security operations, briefing your operations, pre-briefing the event, communicating throughout the event, using the latest diagnostics to ensure that you get it right? There's nobody just audibleizing at the line of scrimmage, so to speak, right?
No, and then we have annual meetings to discuss this amongst the security directors and the league office as well. So we discuss these type of subjects, these topics, to try to figure out what worked here, what didn't work, what possibly could work if we try another method, and So it's continuing communication, hopefully.
So there is intelligence sharing amongst the league if there are these threats that are going to go across teams that the league is aggregating and then passing down. So you're getting threat briefings and threat alerts and the like.
Yes, especially from the league and sometimes from individual security directors. I know if we have an issue here, I might think that this issue here could be an issue potentially for someone close to me. If we have a guy that comes here, or the Redskins are close, the Eagles are close, so I may send them something and say, hey, just be on the lookout, this could happen to you, it happened here. Or if we get emails that are threatening in a way, we send those to the league office just in case someone else from another team has said something similar or the exact same email. These perpetrators don't always fixate on one team. It could just be their way of trying to get in touch with anyone in the league.
And so we have some other security professionals in the room, but I was asking you earlier that when it comes to security, in most cases, the competition between the teams is secondary, and you're all sharing information.
We're not on the field hitting anybody, so hopefully we're communicating through emails or phone calls, whatever, just to let each other know what's happening. There should be no competition between us, and we are very information friendly, to make sure that we all are aware of what's going on. And
the discussion really sparked another question in me. You started out saying that you're here more than you're even at the playing games in the stadium, and so there are certain measures that you have in place here in this home that you have, and we're talking about sharing of information. But does the calculation or what you do in terms of preparation change when you're on the road? How is that different from when you're at home?
Well, in a lot of ways, the awareness becomes heightened because you don't have the same amount of security measures in place because we're not home. Yeah. So we are familiar with our home environment in the facility. When we're on the road at a team hotel, we're relying on local law enforcement from that area. So we have developed contacts over the years because we travel to a lot of the same places, especially within a division. We go every year, so we can establish relationships in the law enforcement community so we can get intelligence on what's happening. We may stay at the same hotels so we can talk to the security directors at the hotels that can tell us what's been happening at their hotels. Once we get to the stadium, we're totally relying on our counterparts through the NFL to help us to deal with whatever situations may arise at those stadiums. So it is a little different when we travel, and we become more reliant upon others as opposed to when we're at home at our own facilities.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know, Chris, you've had a lot of experience doing this kind of advanced work. Do you have anything to add to what Dan?
No, I think that's the biggest thing. I was actually going to talk about a little bit of advanced work on the next slide, but just kind of what he was talking about. It's a constant mindset of doing advanced work and following security and in the post-security, after action reports, even though it may be small and may be big, but it's that constant mindset that you have to have.
All right, well, let's move on because this is a very, flowing discussion, but let's move on and talk very specifically now about physical threats. Chris, you mentioned the tragic events in Paris. We've seen these kind of threats in a variety of different arenas over the years. How, and I'll just throw it open, whoever wants to answer first, how do teams address these physical threats?
Right. Well, and kind of what I ended with the last slide there, but it is a mindset. It's a lifestyle for the directors of security. It's really a lifestyle for any director of security, for any corporation. It's a constant 24/7 thinking about security and security issues. Dealing with, we're sitting here talking about ball teams, security for the personnel, security for the admin staff, the security for your facility, security for the stadium. So it's not just a one aspect or one trick pony. These guys are constantly thinking about issues 24/7, and it does become a lifestyle. But in dealing with, in sports stadiums, there's so many aspects, and sporting events, there's so many aspects that you have to think about. Multiple events at stadiums. What are the needs of security, uniform security, contract security? How do we incorporate those guys? How much do we need for a football game? How much do we need for a concert? How much do we need for another event, maybe of lesser, of security nature? So it's a constant movement of those ideas. Knowing your emergency action plan, what's going to take place between a natural disaster and a man-made disaster? What are our policies and procedures that we need to know about, that I have to know personally, and then incorporate to make sure that everyone in the organization knows about as well. And then also, believe it or not, it's a new age, drones. That's a new hot topic here with the stadiums. The drones flying around, there's really no mandate right now for the policy of drones. The only thing that I can really think of.
You do it out of your backyard with a $50 toy, right?
Right.
Put a camera on it.
The only thing that really is out there is maybe some sort of FAA regulation and a no-fly zone but that's
Regulation.
maybe, a regulation. There's no one that can actually go out and, facilitate
countermeasures for drones right now is an open.
There's unless you have the dome stadium, that's the only thing that's the main countermeasure out there. But again, that's another issue for these guys to start looking at.
Wow.
And, do you prepare differently for a threat like, a bomb threat or a person with a weapon versus a terrorist threat?
No, you prepare the same every day, 100% to the T. You react differently based on the situation that's given you. So you're prepared 100% for everything that's going to take place, and then you react based on what's given to you.
And again, that calls for not audibilizing at the line of scrimmage, right? You have to do that in the situation, but you have to have assessed your environment, come up with plans, train the plans, test those plans, fill in the gaps, and it's a recurring cycle, right? It never just gets put on the shelf and you say, you got it, it's good to go.
No, and that we'll probably get into one. We're going to talk about the Safety Act, but with the teams, and Darren, you can chime in as well, but they're constantly, especially at these stadiums, local law enforcement and the SWAT teams are doing their measures and their activities there. You'll have the bomb disposal units coming out. They may have hazmat unit come out. There's activities going on from law enforcement and emergency medical personnel that are constantly doing training exercises within these stadiums.
One of the things I know in law enforcement, there was a phrase, complacency kills. So you can't just sit back and feel like, things are going good right now. There's no need for me to be thinking about something happening. So you have to always be productive and trying to think about what could happen next. If you see something that needs improvement, you need to act on it, because it's not just about you, it's about the people that you take care of. And that's a lot of people, whether it's a facility or a stadium. That's a lot of people that are relying on your expertise to make sure that they are safe and secure. And a lot of times, safety and security is a mindset. If you feel like the environment is safe, you're going to be okay. If you it doesn't even have to be what you know or don't know. It's just a feeling. It's a perception as reality concept. So you got to take measures to be out front as much as you can and not sit back and feel like, well, it hasn't happened here or it's not going to happen. You almost have to think it's going to happen, and what do I need to do to keep it from happening?
So, we talked a little bit about that, sort of doing the risk analysis, and it sounds like it's something that really you're just constantly updating and it's ongoing. So do you practice your response plans? I mean, how do you talked a little bit about, the response is different depending upon the threat, but, what do you do just to actually prepare and to ensure that the plan that you have in place will actually work when the time comes?
Well, there is preparation and planning. There's testing. You have to have things in place. You have to try what you have in place to see if it works. One of the challenges at the facility during the week is, how do you do a plan when you've got guys on the field practicing football and coaches need every minute they can to prepare for the upcoming game. So to actually use a plan or to go through your method is taken away from valuable time of a coach. 9 times out of 10, it's the coaches that are inconvenienced and the players that are inconvenienced the most. Not to mention staff that are working, but you have to do it under those conditions because there's no need in doing it when the players aren't here. You need to do it at the most chaotic time when everybody's doing something, and then you have that alarm that goes off. What do people do? So you have to do it while everything's happening on a normal day. On the busiest time, you need to get these measures in place and try them out, see what happens.
And that takes obviously commitment at the top. That they're going to dedicate some time, and I know that with the Ravens, that is more than a dozen times we've heard that about how important that is and how top-level resources are allocated for that, including ensuring that there's follow-up and training and the right people are in place. I know we just did one of weather, asymmetrical weather poses threats to operations, and we were working with a power company that they're doing their normal jobs, but we had to simulate a major hurricane damage and what would happen. And to get them to come off their jobs, their regular jobs, and do the crisis response planning and then fill in the gaps, that makes for a long day, but it does. Like any other compliance program, security being part of that, it takes tone at the top, resources, commitment, and continual cycle of improvement, right?
Absolutely. And just a note to the audience, I'm asking a lot of questions, but there is an opportunity for you all to pose questions as well. You can type them into the chat function that you see on your screen, and we will make sure we save time toward the end to answer them. So please feel free to submit any questions that you have. And I guess Chris mentioned this a little bit earlier. So now I think I'll turn to you and ask you to talk a little bit about the Safety Act and how that plays into this, what we're discussing.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been diving into the Safety Act for the past year heavily. The Safety Act, in a nutshell, is a protection against any type of litigation stemming from a terrorist attack on any type of critical infrastructure. With regards to the NFL as a whole, and what Darren had mentioned earlier with best practices, the NFL has its Best Practice Safety Act accredited. And what that means is there's 2 types of accreditation. There's a designation and a certification. And what happens is in the designation level, there's a cap. The Department of Homeland Security puts a cap on the liability that company, that franchise, that critical infrastructure will meet from any type of litigation stemming from an attack. Certification is 100% immunity from any type of litigation stemming from a terrorist attack. And of course, there's different criteria that the Department of Homeland Security sets for both designations. The idea of you need to reach designation first before you can go to certification. Ultimately, the difference between the two is, have you met this standard? Or what have you done to meet this standard? What do you have in place to meet the standard for designation? And then what have you done in furtherance to secure your facility to reach certification?
So let's unpack that a little bit, Chris, because there's probably very few pieces of compliance legislation like this. That is, if you have a safety procedure, let's say a stadium, and maybe I'm saying this the wrong way because you're the Safety Act guy, and if you meet certain procedures and standards and you have certain technologies in place and you are certified that you're using those best practices, and then you're accredited, and then something god-awful happens like a terrorist attack, and then in the litigious society that we live in, the injured victims, the fans, sue the stadium owners and say, you didn't do enough and we were injured because you failed to do. And if the stadium could say, we were following these Safety Act procedures, we were following these standards, it creates immunity if they have in fact done that from litigation.
I want to say yes, but also no. It depends, and it depends on what exactly the franchise, the stadium, or the business has Safety Act accredited.
Right. So it's possible, right? If they've done all these things, they could create an insurance policy, per se, by having immunity from certain activities.
Well, it's not the insurance policy. The Department of Homeland Security will grant that immunity.
Insurance in quotes, right?
Right. So I'll back up to that.
Yeah.
For the designation level, it's the idea is let's give them accreditation for what they have in place right now. Okay, what countermeasures do you have in place right now that will help protect your facility from a terrorist event? Okay, to reach the certification level, you have these that are in place, but now you also have to further your security prowess within your stadium, your arenas, your buildings to reach that certification process. So what have you done? Show me what you have, show me what you've done, and then also in continuance to that certification, you have to put your plan to the test.
And who evaluates it?
The Department of Homeland Security does.
So they come out and they will
absolutely
test your facility.
No. You have to test your facility, and you have to show testing of your facility from a third party, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's any type of third party company that does tabletop exercises, any third party that does physical assessments. The Department of Homeland Security will look at your application, come to your facility, and do a walkthrough to see that you have met the standard that you have on your application, and that's how you reach.
Well, that's a really compelling case for sports facilities. I mean,
well, it is, and it's funny you say that because again, with the NBA, the NFL right now, and Major League Baseball, they have their Best Practices Safety Act accredited. Okay, so what that means is that, and it gets down to the next slide that we're going to talk about, the trickle-down effect. So what happens is those Safety Act accreditation best practices that come down, and we'll use the NFL since we have Darren here, there's a set standard that these stadiums have to meet. During the football season, if the stadium is meeting these operational standards, then the stadium, if there's an event, will be covered or should be covered by the Department of Homeland Security if there's something going on. But the key is if they are meeting the operational standards.
Right.
If for some reason there's some sort of idea that, hey, you have not followed this step, and this step.
So they have to be following these steps, and the event has to occur anyway.
There's certain criteria. Now take this with a grain of salt because there's also recommendations that the stadium needs to be within 100 yards or 100 feet of a road. In New York City, that's not going to happen. Kansas City, they're out in an open field. So, you have to be a little bit lenient with what the criteria is.
Right.
The NBA also has this. Major League Baseball, the NBA is going to this. Major League Baseball also has this. The downfall to this with the best practices is that it only covers the stadiums during the season. So it leaves the stadium susceptible for the rest of the year. So one of the big things that we're trying to get out and talk to the stadiums, talk to these directors of security is, you're covered from a good portion during the stadium. It's the events after, it's the concerts you have to, the circus, the monster truck rallies that you have at your stadiums that aren't covered. And that's what you need to start thinking about.
Did they know that?
There's some directors of security that are well versed within the Safety Act. There's some that
the ones in this room are
right, and then there's some that are still going through the process and educating themselves with regards to the Safety Act. But that's one of the key components that a lot of arenas and stadiums they're starting to find out is that towards the end of those seasons, the rest of the year, they're not covered by the Safety Act designation. Put forth by whatever sport they handle in their own arena. So again, that's why we're out trying to educate, the different entities of what's taking place, what needs to take place, and hopefully we'll be successful in that. Whether they, whatever type of entity they use or whatever type of third party that they go out and get this accreditation. But again, it's not for. It is for the stadiums, but it's all for critical infrastructure, businesses, buildings. The other thing that we need to think about, too, is the scope of what you can get accredited, okay? You can go as big as the facility you want. You can go as small as just your emergency action plan to get accredited. We always talk in our presentations that we talked about two things, and I'll talk about one of the main benefits, but two of the other benefits here in just a second. But we have one company who just got his emergency action plan Safety Act accredited for his company, and it's a Northeastern company.
So if they are activating their emergency response plan and they injure somebody in the course of that, are they covered for that?
Back it up. If there's an event, okay, and someone gets injured based on the emergency action plan,
right?
Okay, if everyone followed their emergency action plan, they're covered.
Right.
Okay. If someone did not follow, or if the company did not follow the emergency action plan, then they're not in the operational procedures of being Safety Act accredited. Now, we'll talk about the two main benefits. One of the benefits that we talked about is the full liability protection of certification. The other one is the potential of the liability reduction that you get from your insurance company. What we're seeing out there, some insurance companies know about the Safety Act, some don't. There's one arena that we have been initially working with, and just by starting the Safety Act process, their insurance company gave them $500,000 reduction off of their liability insurance for the year. So it's one of the big pushes for these stadiums and again, critical infrastructure to move towards the Safety Act is, again, the protection, but then also we're seeing the reduction of liability of insurance, anywhere from about 2 to 7%.
Great. And I'll go ahead and move to the next slide. You kind of previewed that a little bit, and maybe talk about what teams should be looking from their outside vendors, from a security standpoint, and how.
So one of the big things, there's a trickle-down effect, and this is what stadiums need to start looking for, and this is what a lot of critical infrastructure, buildings, private entities need to start looking at. The trickle-down effect occurs when and we'll use the football stadiums here, when a football stadium hires an outside security vendor that is already Safety Act accredited. And what that means is that company's policies and procedures, how they operate from the technology standpoint, how they operate from their physical assessment standpoint, once that entity, that third-party entity is hired by the stadium and they start doing work for that stadium, if that entity, that third-party vendor is Safety Act accredited, their accreditation, their protection automatically covers the stadium. And the stadium gets a full certification process, but only from the standpoint of what that third entity is doing. So if we'll use magnetometers since that's a big deal within all major league sports right now, is if you hire a third-party magnetometer vendor and they are Safety Act accredited, which they should be for all these entities, then the stadium, the arena is covered by the Safety Act from a certification process just for the aspect of using the magnetometer. So long story short, if something happens at the magnetometers, they were following the operational status, the arena is covered based off of that process and that accreditation. That should be the very first question any critical infrastructure, any arena, any type of private business asks when they bring in security vendors is, are you Safety Act accredited? If they're not, push them away, find someone who is because of the trickle-down certification that you receive from them.
Right. That's the first question on the checklist, you would think, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
This is a really interesting discussion, and I am starting to get some questions from the audience. So as to be able to get to those, I'm going to defer some of my questions and start asking these. So I think they're really interesting. And this is something we had talked about earlier, Darren, before we started, so I'm going to give this one to you. How do you protect players from economic predators, and how can players get the right advice to manage what is a lot of money for them very suddenly?
That's a great question.
Yes, it is. That's one of the bigger issues that we deal with is the whole financial aspect of the players. From a team perspective, just from a liability standpoint, we don't refer people to manage their money, but we do try to educate them on what to look for as far as who they hire themselves. The NFL, the league office, does do a good job of vetting certain people. If we send a name or business to the NFL, they can check that person or that business to make sure that they are in good standing. So we hope to be able to reach the players first, just in conversation, communicating to them that they need to be diligent in making sure that if there's a business venture or financial advisor who's knocking on their door, and they always come knocking once they get the money, before you invest any money into that business or to that person, to have them checked out to make sure that they're okay.
Does the league have, like we do as well, we have young talent, they get their first job. Or does the team have reputable brokers? We have a thing called a broker simplification program where they'll put somebody like Merrill Lynch, which is everybody's well-known, established financial advisor. Do they have those types of things where it's just not some guy with a card who's got some idea about investing in a bar? But
no, we don't, and I don't think any team will, just from a liability standpoint, because if we refer one company to deal with the players and this player feels like this company hasn't done a good job, they would probably come back at the organization saying, hey, well, you referred this guy, so I want you to take care of whatever losses I have.
Right.
So we allow them to use whoever they want to use. We just try to impose our will, so to speak, on them to at least check out whoever they're using to make sure that they all have a good standing.
Right.
Here's another really great question, and I guess I can throw it open to all of you guys because I know you have perspectives on it. How would you approach false positives? And this is really very interesting when it comes to communicated physical threats. Given the potential impact if the threat is real and nothing is done, this person says, I would imagine false threats could create a significant cost as well. So what do you do about false threats?
With physical threats and false, there's no room for error. You have to treat every threat as a viable threat, especially when it comes to personal safety and stadium safety. Personal safety, of course, you're dealing with the athletes from the stadium standpoint.
And you saw this all the time, I imagine.
All the time.
Secret
Every
right?
single threat is a viable threat until you make it and you find out it's not a viable threat.
Right.
That's a really good question. And then we have another Safety Act question for Chris. How does Safety Act designation or certification of stadium vendors or third parties affect Safety Act coverage of the facility itself?
So, and that's what we talked about, the trickle-down effect. So if you have a third party, and so here's the shameless plug with PwC, our physical security practice is Safety Act accredited. We're certified for critical infrastructure designated for critical infrastructure, certified for ports. If there was a stadium that were to hire us to do a physical assessment on their stadium in furtherance of their accreditation, our protection automatically covers them from a certification standpoint based on the operations and suggestions we give them. So that's how it's that trickle-down effect. Shameless plug.
Okay. Another one, we talked about social media monitoring and the use of social media and how important that is. Another question, are there other emerging tools and technology that you see in the market that could be most helpful in protecting?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wonder if the person asking knew we just had our technology retreat because there are, as the head of the PwC's intelligence practice, you can imagine that I have the vendors coming to me trying to sell their latest tools. So we're constantly evaluating the latest, let's talk about data aggregation tools right now. So you want to be able to look at the population of people who are tweeting in the Baltimore area. How do you do that, right? There are tools, and there are analysts that can be trained to deploy those tools. So that's one thing that we're investing in, particularly not only for sports teams, but if you imagine any vendor or third party that you're going to do business with, people take to social media to evaluate whether you're being asked to or not. That was a really bad, vendor. That was a really bad agent. That was a really bad. So you're like, well, how do I find out how great a consultant Chris Sanchez is? I can aggregate qualitatively now the sentiment about you in social media, Chris, and I can see, and I can look at from various aspects: smart, prompt, on time, courteous, knows his stuff, good dresser, bad dresser, whatever you wanted to look at. You can mine these tools to determine what you're corrupt, not corrupt. Right. And so imagine, right? You look at your record, and everything's like Chris is a good guy, probably doesn't have any, he's been a former Secret Service, held a top secret clearance. You look at your classic background check and he looks fine. And you go and hire him. And sitting out there in social media is a diatribe about him, and you missed it. That is where we're looking to put a lot of technology advancement to give our clients additional insights into third parties, vendors, potential players, right? Collecting up all the data, aggregating it, and then spitting it out in a digestible way so that it gives you a snapshot as to what Chris Sanchez is as a professional consultant. Maybe I will do that.
It looks like we have time for one last question, so I'm going to throw this one to Darren. It's specifically for you. And the question is, when you receive off-the-field intelligence, such as a player risk assessment, how is that information operationally incorporated into personnel decisions being made by the front office? So like, how does that work?
Well, a lot of it does go into the approval or disapproval of someone that they want to draft or not. We are very diligent here to look at all aspects of an individual to find out what makes the most sense. When you're talking about investing millions of dollars into a young man who's 21 or 22 years old, you're also hoping that person is responsible, not only a good player, but responsible as a human being in society, responsible as a person. So little things in social media can, as Glenn said, can give you a good assessment of what this person is into. If you look at whoever he hangs with, who is he tweeting with, or who is he social networking with, however, what are the topics? Teams are being diligent. Our team is being diligent in all capacities to make sure that we make the right decision, the best decision going forward as far as who we draft, who we want to bring in as a free agent. It all plays a part in how we decide who's going to be a part of this organization.
Hey Darren, because we were just talking about this at lunch, is that let's say there is somebody that you decide to draft. You have some programs that might have some risk, but if you kind of accept the risk, you do some things to ensure that you can mitigate those risks, right? Like buddy programs.
Yeah, we do. Programs. We have a mentoring program here where we take a veteran player and we will assign that veteran player to a rookie player. Hopefully, this veteran will have an impact on this young man who's now coming into the league that has wealth. Try to teach him how to be more proactive and doing the right things, not just on the field, but more importantly off the field. Because the off-the-field activity, if your personal life is usually in line and is straight and it's boding well in society, you can be just as dominant in your personal life as in your professional life on the field. So we want to make sure we get a good person that kind of gives him a good start as to what he should be or should not be doing in the league. So we start early. We start in our rookie programs. I know Harry Swain is our player development guy. He's very diligent and getting next to these guys, getting under their skin, so to speak, becoming a big brother or a father to make sure that we impose our philosophy, our team, our organizational philosophy on these young men, and letting them know we're not going to baby you, but we also want you to be aware that we're going to put a lot of effort into making sure that you understand our way of doing things and what's important.
Well, this has been a really interesting discussion. Thank you to all the panelists for being here today and participating, and thank you very much to you in the audience as well. There were a few questions we didn't get to, and I'll see if we can get specific answers emailed out after the presentation, and we'll certainly make the slides available to everyone who registered as well. So thank you again, and have a great day.